Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. If you know me at all, then you know that I absolutely adore audiobooks. I'm always listening to one, I always have an audiobook on the go. And people often ask me why I like audiobooks so much, which ones I listen to, how I listen to them. So what I thought I'd do today is a Q&A on why I love audiobooks and some of my favourites. So I've compiled a list of questions that people have given to me through Instagram, and let's dive in because there are quite a few, and talking about audiobooks is one of my favourite things to do. So question number 1 is, how long have you been listening to audiobooks, and which is the first audiobook you remember listening to? Well, I've been listening to audiobooks since I was very, very little. My mum actually bought me some old records to start out with, which shows how far we're going back. And I think it was My Naughty Little Sister, and who was it read by? I've made a note. Felicity Kendall. So My Naughty Little Sister is one of my favourite books. It's by Dorothy Edwards. I adored it when I was young. And Felicity Kendall is the most brilliant narrator. And my mum had it on record player and I listened to it probably when I was about 3 years old. And that really started my addiction. And I went on to have some of the Enid Blyton books on cassette tape, and I also had Black Beauty and Ballet Shoes. I have really clear memories of these early audiobooks of mine. In fact, I remember them better than the first books I read, for instance, which are a real blur to me now. But I remember just falling in love with audiobooks. And it seems to me like I've just spent my whole life really listening to them. What I did when I was little was I had a little portable cassette player, and I would carry it around with me pretty much wherever I went, room by room. I would carry it with me so I could keep listening to my audiobook. So that's what started the addiction, and I've just never looked back. I still listen to them all the time. Do your audiobook preferences differ to your physical reading choices? That's an interesting question, because I would say I definitely do listen to audiobooks in a different way from how I choose books that I physically read. Although I do reread books, I don't reread as many as you might think, but I listen to audiobooks over and over and over again. I would say for me, rather than comfort reading necessarily when I return to the same books that I love, I do a lot of comfort listening. So I listen to many of my favourite books, like all of Jane Austen's novels, a lot of Nancy Mitford, things like that. I listen to those as audiobooks and I listen to them over and over. And I think this started when I was little. You know how small children love having a story repeated. They love that sense of familiarity, and that was partly why I enjoyed listening to books so much when I was young. And that sort of stayed with me. So my favourite books I love to listen to over and over again. And part of that is why I love to listen to a lot of classics. And I really feel that they're brilliant books to listen to, partly because you can become very familiar with them by listening to them often. That's what I love to do, and I always find that I get a deeper meaning every time I read or listen to a classic book. Now, I will also add that I almost always read a book before I then listen to it. So for instance, I read all of Jane Austen's novels before I got them as audiobooks, and I still much prefer to read a book first before I listen to it, because I think you get most detail when you physically read a book. And then part of the joy of audiobooks is that you can just get to know that story much better. So the story has to be really high quality, really good, or it has to alternatively, in a way, just be something really light, but that is a real comfort kind of listen for me. And for that, I would say Agatha Christie's are some of the audiobooks I love the most, and I listen to them over and over again, which perhaps seems a bit odd because generally I always remember, who the murderer is, but I still love to listen to them. I love Golden Age mysteries, and they're just a sort of comfort read for me, but I mainly listen to them on audiobook now. But again, initially I read all of them first. Next question is, what was the last audiobook you listened to? Well, speaking of Agatha Christie, the last audiobook I listened to was Ordeal by Innocence, read by Hugh Fraser. And I mean, I've listened to that so many times in the past, but I don't grow tired of Agatha Christie. What's your current listen? My current listen is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, and that is read by Alex Jennings and Jenny Agutter. And I specifically chose this version because I love Jenny Agutter as a narrator. She's really excellent. And The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is my favourite Bronte book. I think it's really underrated. It's by Anne Bronte, and it's just wonderful. Again, I read it first, but I also listened to it on audio. When I was quite young, I have a really strong memory of the first time I listened to the book, and it was when I must have been about 12 years old, and I had a bad fever, and I was just in bed for a couple of days, and I just had on The Tenant of Wildfell Hall the whole time I was sick. And even though I felt miserable, the story just transported me to somewhere else, and I remember just loving listening to it. So it's funny what clear memories I have centered around the audiobooks that I've listened to in the past, because I often don't remember things very well from my childhood. I think partly because I moved so much. So having memories of audiobooks is that much more special to me because I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood. Next question is, do you prefer audiobooks or physical books? Oh, definitely physical books. I mean, I would always choose to read a book before I would listen to it, like I said. However, audiobooks add so much joy, so much value to my life. I can't actually imagine my life without them. Not a day goes by in which I do not listen to an audiobook. They're just a very big part of my everyday and of my life. So they are also really important to me. They are essentially the soundtrack to my life in a way. I just always have an audiobook on the go, so they matter very much to me. Name an audiobook on your wish list. So an audiobook that's actually in my wish list at the moment is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, read by Juliet Stevenson. I do like to get a lot of the classics, especially my favourite classics, on audiobooks, like I said, so I can listen to them over and over again. And I don't yet have North and South, and I would really like that one because it's a great story, and because now I've moved north from the south, I want to return to that book. So next question is, where and when do you listen to audiobooks? I listen to books pretty much everywhere. I mainly listen to them whenever I'm doing something that doesn't require my brain to be actively participating in whatever I'm doing. So when I'm getting dressed, brushing my teeth, putting on my makeup, vacuuming, washing up, cleaning, editing photos, replying to emails that, don't need a lot of brain power, pretty much anything like that, I will have an audiobook going at the same time. I very rarely, in fact never, do I just sit and listen to an audiobook without actually doing something. I never, ever, ever do that. I would never just sit and listen. If it's a book I really have to concentrate on, an audiobook that I don't know the story, and so I really have to concentrate and listen, I will still do something like knitting at the same time. Part of the joy of audiobooks for me is that I think it's a genuine way that you can multitask, and there aren't that many ways actually that you can multitask effectively, but audiobooks is one of those ways, and that's partly why I love them so much. So yes, in the car I'll listen to them. Don't listen to them when I'm walking, which is interesting because I know a lot of people listen to something while they're walking. I think that's just partly having lived in a city for so long, and I would just never want to not be aware of what was going on around me, basically walking in the streets of London. So I've never got in the habit of walking and listening to something. But, or commuting, actually, I never listened on the tube to an audiobook, but in the car, I would definitely listen to one. Next question. What genre of book do you most like to listen to? Well, classic literature and mysteries. Those are the two big ones I would say that I listen to the most. But also just a lot of my very favourite books. So we'll get to that a bit later. What are your top 5 favourite audiobooks? Actually, we're here now. So this is really tricky, but some of the audiobooks that I listen to the most are the books by P.G. Wodehouse, especially the Jeeves and Wooster series. I absolutely adore them. Jonathan Cecil reading them is a complete joy. It really is. It's just such a wonderful experience listening to him read a book. And in this instance, I feel this is an example of where having the audiobook actually enhances your pleasure of the physical books too. Because Jonathan Cecil is such an amazing narrator that now if I ever physically read a Jeeves and Wooster book, for instance, I can hear his voice and it just adds so much to the experience of reading it because he does it so perfectly. So sometimes I really believe that audiobooks can actually enhance your experience of a physical book too. And they bring the world of that book, of the author, just so much more to life. My very favourite Jeeves and Wooster book is probably Right Ho Jeeves, and I really recommend the audiobook to that, read by Jonathan Cecil, because it is hilarious. I laugh so hard every time I listen to that book. I still laugh, even though I listen to it over and over again. A Murder is Announced is one of my very favourite Agatha Christie books. I listen to that a lot, and that's read by Joan Hickson, who is brilliant. She's my favourite Miss Marple narrator. This is a Miss Marple mystery, and I think it's one of the most clever ones. I love that one. Next is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, read by Lindsay Duncan. She's a perfect narrator. I love Lindsay Duncan's voice, and she does a brilliant job with Pride and Prejudice, and I had to get a Jane Austen in this list. In fact, 2, because I adore Persuasion, read by Geraldine McEwan. And I think this is the only instance in which I have an audiobook that I regularly listen to that is abridged, because normally I hate abridged books. And I would normally never listen to an abridged book, but in this instance, I just love Geraldine McEwan's voice for Persuasion. It's perfect. And I think because Persuasion is quite a slight book anyway, it doesn't matter quite so much to me that it's abridged. And I have a particular attachment to Geraldine McEwan's reading of the book because this was the audiobook version that I had when I was little. And I listened to it so many times, and now it has to be her voice for me. So even though it's abridged, I still listen to it. And I know the book well enough that I can sort of fill in really myself the bits that are missing. They've done a pretty good job on the abridgment, and yeah, I just can't listen to anyone else reading it now, so it still is, it's a real favourite of mine. And then, oh yes, finally, I have to say Three Men in a Boat by Jerome K. Jerome, read by Ian Carmichael. Ian Carmichael played Lord Peter Wimsey in the old TV series, and he's a fabulous narrator. Three Men in a Boat is such a funny book. I like a lot of humorous books like P.G. Wodehouse, Three Men in a Boat, The Diary of a Nobody is another favourite listen of mine. And I think partly why I like these funny books so much as audiobooks is because for me, they are real comfort listens. And listening to audiobooks is just a form of comfort reading in a way for me, I think, and something that makes you laugh then is particularly appropriate. But anyway, those are my 5 favourite audiobooks. I'll link to them in the description box down below. Next question is, what's the longest audiobook you've listened to? I think that is probably The Woman in White, which I checked and is 28 hours long. And I listened to that last summer when I went to New York and I wanted something for the sort of long plane journey each way. So I listened to The Woman in White. That's one instance where I was forced to just sit and listen and not do something at the same time, was on the plane. But yeah, so I listened to that for the journey and also a bit while I was in New York and really enjoyed it. It's a great version. I mean, again, I've read the book already, but it was really nice to return to the story through the audiobook. It was super. Which is the most disappointing narrator you have come across? Yeah, so big disappointment to me is that on Audible, the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries by Dorothy L. Sayers aren't available read by Ian Carmichael. Like I said, he played Lord Peter Wimsey in the old TV series. To me, he's got the perfect voice for Lord Peter, and when I was little, I rented all of the audiobooks from the library of the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries, and they were read by Ian Carmichael, and they were just perfect. They were unabridged, and they were just excellent listens. And Audible don't have them. They have a woman reading the Dorothy L. Sayers. I think Jane McDowell is her name, and I did give one a go to, because I'd love to have them on audiobooks. I gave one a go, hoping I would like it, but I really didn't. I actually just couldn't listen to it. I didn't finish listening to it. So that was a major disappointment to me. And please, Audible, get Ian McEwan's version, Ian Carmichael's version, reading Lord Peter Wimsey, because, I really miss them. Who are your favourite narrators? I've already mentioned Jonathan Cecil reading the P.G. Wodehouse books. He is the perfect narrator for them. He is absolutely brilliant, and he'll actually enhance the novels for you. He's that good. Another favourite of mine is Anna Massey reading Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Somehow she just captures the narrator so well through her voice. It's really perfect. The sort of dreaminess of the book, she just really captures that, and I love her version, reading Rebecca. I'm going to listen to that later this month because I want to reread Rebecca, but I will listen to it as an audiobook. Joan Hickson reading the Miss Marple books, I've already mentioned that. Then I adore the BBC dramatisations with Clive Merrison and Michael Williams as Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. I don't normally love abridged things, but because the BBC did real dramatisations, so to me that they're more like listening to a play of the Sherlock Holmes books, they're really brilliant. They really work, and I adore them. I mean, I absolutely adored them when I was young. I listened to them so many times, And I still really love them now. I think they did a fabulous job. I even wrote to Bert Coules when I was little to ask about some of the music featured in the dramatizations, because I loved some of the violin solos that you hear. And he actually wrote back to me, which was really sweet, when I was young, and told me. So I'm a big fan. He was involved in doing a lot of the dramatizations, and I'm just a big fan of them. I still listen to them now. They've done all of the short stories and the novellas, which I think is fantastic too. And Bert Coules even wrote a few add-ons too, and he did a really good job. So I love that series. What else do I like? I love Christopher Timothy reading the James Herriot All Creatures Great and Small books, some of my favourite books, and he's the perfect narrator. Leo McKern reading the Rumpole books by John Mortimer. I can't find these on Audible, and it's so frustrating because I adore the Rumpole books. They're about a barrister in London, but they're just so funny. And Leo McKern played Rumpole in the old TV series, and he just has the perfect voice. They're fantastic. I've already mentioned Ian Carmichael reading Lord Peter Wimsey books. I adore Hugh Laurie reading the Professor von Egelfeld books by Alexander McCall Smith. These are hilarious books too. They really are brilliant. And Hugh Laurie reading them, he just brings the characters to life so well. And if you're in the mood to have a really good laugh, then I would so recommend these books. They're definitely amongst my favourites. I love Martin Jarvis reading the Just William books by Richmal Crompton. Again, these are hilarious reads. They're for children, but adults love them just as much. I did listen to them when I was a child, and I haven't stopped listening to them since, because they're just so funny. And there's a collection of the Christmas stories read by him, and I listen to those, I think, almost every Christmas. They're so good. I really recommend that little festive collection. Another favourite is Alan Bennett reading Winnie the Pooh. I mean, that's just so charming. It's like, if I've had a really bad day, then what I need to do is draw a bath, get a glass of wine, and listen to Alan Bennett reading Winnie the Pooh as I soak in the bathtub, and it just makes everything feel a bit better. That is just, you know, my medicine for when you have a bad day. Try that. You will honestly feel a lot better. I Capture the Castle, read by Jenny Agutter. Like I said, Jenny Agutter is one of my favourite narrators, and her reading I Capture the Castle is just a wonderful experience. I love that book anyway. It's one of my favourite books, and getting to listen to Jenny Agutter read it is brilliant. And then finally, Cranford, read by Prunella Scales. Again, I love Prunella Scales' voice. She's such a good narrator. Cranford is one of my favourite books too, and that's just a lovely experience listening to that. Next question. Name a book that isn't available as an audio but you think should be. I'm really disappointed that I can't find Elizabeth Goudge's books on audio at all, and I can't find them on Audible, and I'm not sure they've ever been done as audiobooks because I've never come across them ever. And I think The Little White Horse by her should absolutely be an audiobook, so I hope someone gets on that at some point. Do you have a favourite audiobook read by its author? I really like that question. So every Christmas, my family had a tradition of listening to Dylan Thomas reading A Child's Christmas in Wales. It's one of my dad's favourite books, and he would always put it on sometime in the lead up to Christmas, and it's just the perfect Christmassy listen. Dylan Thomas has the most amazing voice. I absolutely love it. And kind of in a similar vein, listening to Laurie Lee reading Cider with Rosie is pretty amazing too. I mean, he just has, of course, the perfect voice to it, so that is very special as well. Next question. Do you choose books that have a favoured narrator, or is the book paramount? Well, yes, I would say the book is always paramount in that even if it were a narrator I really loved, reading a book that I wasn't very interested in, I wouldn't choose to listen to that. I mean, I have to know that I'm going to really like the book, and then it has to be a good narrator. So I would say that I always look for the book first, but I'm very, very picky about the narrator. I'll always trial listening to it before, I purchase it or anything, because I have to know that I will like the narrator's voice. Saying that, I will also really go through carefully some of the classics like Pride and Prejudice, for instance, and try out every single one until I find a narrator that I really like. Next question. Do you find yourself getting distracted while listening and missing details, or do you read along? I would absolutely never read the book whilst listening to it. No, I would never do that. That would drive me crazy. I can read a book much faster than listening to it, so I wouldn't bother to do that. I could only see doing that if it were in a different language, not your native language. Then I think that could be a useful exercise. But no, I don't do that. Do I get distracted? Well, partly why I generally always listen to audiobooks that I already have read, that I already know, is that it doesn't matter if my attention gets pulled away for a couple of minutes and I get taken out of the story, because I know what's going on. I can come back in and just pick up where I left off. However, I would also say almost a whole life spent listening to audiobooks means that I'm very, very good at retaining information that's processed through listening. I think I've just really honed that skill by now, so I don't get distracted and I really can listen to something and do something else at the same time, which I feel very fortunate to be able to do that. But it has certainly been a lot of practice, so I don't really get that distracted. And then someone else said, how do you manage to stay awake? I keep dozing off. Well, I would never lie in bed and just listen to an audiobook. I mean, like I've said already, I always use it as a way to essentially pass the time if I'm doing a bit of a boring activity like getting dressed or washing up. Then I think that, experience in the day is always enhanced if you're listening to a good story at the same time. So I would never drop off when I'm listening to a book, or if I did, it would be really worrying. But no, I never lie in bed and listen to something. Next question is, do you erase the audiobooks after you read them? Not quite sure what you mean by that, but if you mean do I delete them? No, they are expensive and I only buy ones I really want. So I always keep them. I mean, you don't always have to have them fully downloaded on your device, but yes, I do keep them. Next question is, do you buy audiobooks or borrow them from the library? And someone else has also asked, do you pay for more than one audiobook a month? They're so pricey. So yes, they can be expensive, and I definitely do borrow audiobooks from the library. A lot like the Agatha Christie books read by Hugh Fraser are available from the library. I also like to own them myself, so I've been listening to these for years. So over time, I've built up a pretty substantial Audible library myself. And I always use an Audible credit every month when I get one for free. I often purchase their 3 credits for £18 or something like that, which works out really well because a lot of these classic books are maybe £24 or something like that to buy. So I would never pay that full price for them. I always use a credit, or I do their sort of bargain when you get 3 credits for a discounted price, and that works really well. But I think almost every library now too should have the option where you can borrow audiobooks, and that's really great. And you know, you can just stream them, and that's a really good option as well. Next question is, audiobooks would be great to improve my English. Where would you suggest I start? I think they would be really great for helping anyone to improve their English. I think you should start wherever your interest lies. I think if you enjoy mysteries, then something like Agatha Christie would be a really good place to start, because all her books are quite slim and they're not that complicated either in terms of the language used and stuff. Some of it's a bit outdated now, but I think that they're quite simple, good books that will also keep you engrossed and should be quite easy to follow along. So if you do like mysteries, I would definitely start there. I feel listening to an audiobook doesn't count the way reading does. Do you? Well, that is interesting, because in a way I agree with you. And for instance, when I do my reading wrap-ups at the end of every month, I rarely talk about all of the audiobooks I've read in that time. I think often because they're just re-listens to me, somehow to me they just don't really feel like they count. However, I'm really against any kind of snobbishness around audiobooks. I think they're great, and I think in many ways they do count the same as reading. I mean, I think both is great, but I don't at all have a sort of snobby attitude towards listening to books, obviously, especially if they're unabridged. I always try to get unabridged audiobooks, and then I think it's pretty much the same. But for me, I just don't really count them, because they're always rereads for the most part. Okay, so last question. Do you listen with earplugs or with a surround device? I hate anything in my ears. I hate anything in my ears too. I can't tolerate earplugs or anything. So I really get what you mean. I literally just carry my phone around with me wherever I go, and I have it playing on my phone. Fortunately, I live with my mum and she's really tolerant about that. If I were living with someone who weren't so tolerant, I would probably have to use headphones. But I'm lucky in that I do live with someone very tolerant who likes the same books as I do. So yes, I just listen. I have them blaring out on my phone, and I carry it with me all over the house. So that's what I do. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed my answers to these questions. Thanks so much to everyone on Instagram who wrote in such great questions for me. I hope I've answered them okay for you. And I'd love to know, do you love audiobooks? Are they a part of your life the way they are mine? Or would you like to start listening to them? What are some of your favourite audiobooks and narrators that you think I might enjoy? I hope you enjoyed watching this. Do give it a thumbs up if you did, and I'll be back again very soon with another video. Bye!